A little more than 50 years ago, a group of young South African men were arrested and thrown into prison and sentenced to death for leading their people in the fight against apartheid. A little over 20 years ago, these same men were released from prison. And when they came out, they were very old, but their spirit wasn't broken. And they said to us, "Don't burn your country down like other people do when they get their freedom, but instead let us build this country together with those who oppressed us before. And let us forgive them, but we should never forget. And never again in the future of this land will one group of people ever get to dominate another again."
Hugh Masekela was born in Witbank, a coal mining settlement near Johannesburg, South Africa. His father, Thomas Masekela, was a health inspector and a sculptor, and his mother, Pauline Boers, was a social worker, officially classified as a colored in apartheid-era South Africa, and she had a Scottish father. Hugh was one of 4 children in a politically conscious family. His younger sister, Barbara, would eventually become head of the African National Congress Department of Arts and Culture. The children were raised by their grandmother, Johanna, and Hugh was always surrounded by music. The young Masekela was always in trouble, always fighting with the teachers. He was seen to be a proponent of a failed student. Masekela had wanted a trumpet. He was then a pupil at St. Peter's, a remarkable secondary school for black children that became a center for opponents of apartheid before being closed by the authorities. The staff included Oliver Tambo, later leader of the African National Congress, and Reverend Father Trevor Huddleston, later Archbishop Huddleston, president of the British Anti-Apartheid Movement, who lived then in South Africa. He told the priests that if he can only get a trumpet, he won't bother anyone and will make sure that he doesn't get into trouble anymore. Reverend Father Huddleston managed to raise £15 to buy the instrument for young Hugh Masekela, and later found a Black Salvation Army trumpeter to teach Hugh Masekela how to blow the trumpet. Hugh was given his own instrument when he was 14. Other pupils in the school wanted instruments as well, and Reverend Father Huddleston made sure that those instruments were provided and went on to form the Huddleston Jazz Band. Along with Masekela, the band featured the trombonist, Jonas Ngwangwa. Reverend Father Huddleston continued to help Masekela even when after the priest had left the school and South Africa entirely. When he was in the United States, he told Masekela's story to a journalist who suggested that it might interest Louis Armstrong, the best-known trumpeter of the day. Armstrong was fascinated and handed Huddleston one of his horns to give to Masekela. Masekela explored South African styles and avidly followed developments in the American jazz scene as he developed his distinctive Afro-jazz sound as a trumpeter. He joined Abdullah Ibrahim and Jonas Ngwangwa in the Jazz Epistles. In 1959, recorded the first album by a South African jazz band. Jazz Epistles, Verse 1 was the name of their first album. In the same year, Hugh Masekela teamed up with Jonas Ngwangwa and others in the band for the adventurous hit musical King Kong, billed as an all-African jazz opera. Its story of a boxer had an all-black cast and starred the country's first female singer, Miriam Makeba. That was the spark of love that brought Miriam Makeba and Hugh Masekela together. Such an extraordinary flowering of black culture could not last long in the apartheid era. Makeba left the country and her citizenship was revoked because she had taken part in the anti-apartheid film Come Back Africa. In 1960, the year of the Shepville massacre and the banning of the ANC, Masekela also left. Masekela was lucky to get out, for his angry opposition to apartheid had already come to the attention of the apartheid authorities. He traveled first to London, where he was disappointed by the jazz scene, and then to New York, where, like Makeba, he was helped by the musician and activist Harry Belafonte. Hugh Masekela enrolled at the Manhattan School of Music and immersed himself in the city's jazz scene. He was advised by Didi Gillespie and Louis Armstrong to develop his own African style, and in 1963 he released his debut album, Trumpet Africaine. In 1964, he went on to marry Miriam Makeba. Hugh Masekela's angry political stance was not altered by his move to the United States of America. He claimed that South Africans passed information about him to the Americans and that his phone was tapped in New York. He began to identify with the Black Power movement and in 1966 played at the Watts Festival on the anniversary of the riots in the Black Los Angeles neighborhood. In 1967, now living in California and having divorced Miriam Makeba after only 2 years of marriage. The following year, he released the single Grazing in the Grass, an instrumental produced by his friend Stewart Levin, and that became a massive hit, topping the US charts for 3 weeks. Masekela was awarded a gold disc, an extraordinary achievement for an African artist in the US by then. He became a celebrity, but his record company found him increasingly hard to handle. The cover of his Emancipation of Masekela album of 1966 showed him dressed like Abraham Lincoln and was boycotted by distributors. His house was raided by the police and he was put on probation, avoiding a prison sentence on drug charges only because they had no proper search warrant. Promoters and universities cancelled his bookings, but he continued to record powerful albums. After 12 years in exile, Hugh Masekela decided to go back to Africa to explore the music of countries he had never visited. He traveled across West Africa, from Guinea, and then to Zaire, the country of the controversial leader Mobutu Sese Seko. In 1973, he spent time in Kinshasa and went to Liberia, Ghana, and Nigeria, where he stayed for a month with the Afro jazz icon Fela Anikulapo Kuti. The rebellious Kuti introduced him to the Ghanaian band Hedzola Sounds, with whom he recorded and later toured in the US. He returned to Africa with Levine in 1974 when they put together the Zaire 74 concerts that preceded the Rumble in the Jungle boxing match in Kinshasa between Muhammad Ali and George Foreman. In 1986, he founded the Botswana International School of Music. By now, he was rebuilding his following in the West. Helped by growing interest in the world music and African styles, in 1987, he and Makeba joined Paul Simon on the world tour promoting Simon's massively successful album Graceland, which he then partly recorded with black musicians in South Africa, despite a UN cultural boycott. Masekela said he was backing Simon because Graceland was giving black South Africans global exposure. Other musicians of the black race disagreed with Hugh Masekela. The following year, he and Miriam Makeba again shared the stage in London, this time at the Nelson Mandela 70th birthday tribute at Wembley Stadium. Masekela and Makiba performed Soweto Blues, which mourned the deaths of the many children killed by police during the 1976 Soweto uprising. Mandela was released in 1990, and with the ending of apartheid, Masekela was able to return to South Africa after an absence of 30 years. Rather than retire, he threw himself into a series of new recordings and projects. In 2010, he was the opening performer in the globally transmitted concert that kicked off the FIFA Football World Cup finals in South Africa, the very first ever World Cup hosted in Africa. Having issued more than 40 albums across his career, his final one was No Borders in 2016. Among his many awards was South Africa's highest honor, the Order of Ikhamanga. Masekela's second marriage to Chris Calloway, daughter of the jazz artist Cap Calloway, ended in divorce, and he is survived by his son, Selema Sal Masekela, and Paula Twala from other relationships, and by his sisters, Ellen and Barbara Masekela. Hugh Ramapolo Masekela, the musician and the anti-apartheid activist, died in January 23, 2018.